On this vote, the yeas are 286 and the nays are 138. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
And with that, after 18 months mired in Congress, the Violence Against Women Act will now go to the president's desk for his signature to be reauthorized. The Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, was first passed in 1994 and has been reauthorized twice since with strong bipartisan support. But what many expected to be an easy pro forma reauthorization this time around ran into the opposition of many House Republicans and some Senate Republicans who objected to 3 ways the new version of the bill expanded protections. They didn't want the bill to prohibit discrimination against LGBT survivors of violence. They didn't want the bill to expand protection of undocumented immigrant women who report abuse by documented or natural-born citizens. And they didn't want to extend equal access to justice to American Indian women, who under current law fall into a gray area in which if a woman is assaulted by a non-Indian boyfriend or husband on tribal lands, neither the tribal police nor state and local law enforcement have jurisdiction to protect her. House Republicans tried one last time today to pass their version of the bill without those protections, but it failed. Then within minutes, as expected, the House took up the Senate version, which passed earlier this month, and the 5-year reauthorization passed. Vice President Joe Biden, who was responsible for the original act as a senator in 1994, spoke today to a teen dating violence awareness event at the White House after the bill passed.
There are still too many women in this country who live in fear of violence, and there's still too many victims we mourn. There's an urgent need for the bill that got passed, and it cannot be more obvious in my view.
Joining me now, Democratic Stabenow of Michigan and Ilyse Hogue, the new president of NARAL Pro-Choice America. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Senator, I guess my first question for you is, how do you understand this process? Why did it take so long? And then why, seemingly out of nowhere, did you finally win?
Well, first of all, we're thrilled tonight that this happened. It's been 14 months since the House had the opportunity to act and didn't, and we've had 16 million victims of violence, severe violence, rape, assault, since they chose not to act. And in fact, as we're talking right now, there will be 24 victims of domestic violence for every minute that we're speaking this evening. So this is very serious. All I can say is I think that it was the overwhelming bipartisan outrage and activism of women and families and law enforcement, people who care about their families and children across the country that made this happen. I mean, they were overwhelmed with response from the public. And I think it really means that when people get engaged, when we stand up for what's right, and the basic premise was every victim of domestic violence should have the opportunity to be protected. Law enforcement should have the resources they need to protect them, regardless of their circumstance. Violence is violence. We stood up for that principle as Democrats, and there was an overwhelming amount of support from across the country, and we were able to get it done. And I'm very grateful to everyone that helped make that happen.
Ilyse, you're no stranger to activism and pushing up on Capitol Hill. And do you see this as a fairly straightforward story of just successful outside pressure overcoming this political obstruction?
Well, certainly the halls of Congress were flooded with Senator Stabenow said. But I think what we're seeing here is that we've actually found the line where the political survival instincts of the GOP actually trump their fealty to the party extreme. Unfortunately, that line actually was around the question of whether or not women deserve protection from being beaten. But, you know, one of the things that we felt and saw in last year's election is that there are a whole bunch of folks out there that would like to create classes among women. Some women don't deserve protection from the law like in VAWA. Some women don't deserve to have access to contraception or choice. But you know what? Women made their voices heard last election. They're going to do it again. And that's why I think the Republicans are giving a second look to these bills that actually say, hey, women, you know what? We're going to offer you protections and we're going to treat you like United States citizens with all the rights and freedoms that's afforded by that.
The most controversial, I think it's fair to say, or the item that got the most attention was these expanded protections for American Indian women on tribal lands, where there is a tremendously high and really outrageously high rates of domestic violence and assault. And to give the most charitable interpretation of the objection, Senator, some members of Congress, Republicans, thought that there was constitutional problems or jurisdictional problems, or this was setting some kind of jurisdictional precedent that was going to come back and be bad in the future. And I just wonder what your argument was to allay your colleagues in the Senate, where it passed by a fairly overwhelming majority, to allay their fears about that.
Well, first of all, I think those were just excuses, and secondly,
I was trying to be charitable.
Yes, I know. You did a good job. But the bottom line is violence is violence. It does not matter. And, you know, I remember back in the 70s when I was a very small child, but I led the effort in Michigan to create one of the first 2 domestic violence shelters. And we went through all those kinds of arguments, all those excuses at the time. It was very tough at the time. But since then, this has become a commonly held bipartisan belief that domestic violence is wrong, that it shouldn't matter whether you are assaulted outside your house by somebody you don't know, right, or inside your house by somebody you do know, that you ought to have protections under the law. And that, in fact, the most dangerous situation a law enforcement official can walk into is a domestic violence situation. So they need the support. And so we just kept saying over and over again that this is about making sure we treat all victims, all women, with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter if it's tribal land, if they're in a city, if they're in a small town out in the country. It doesn't matter who their partner is.
Right.
Violence is violence.
Ilyse, my understanding, I think I'm recalling this correctly, that all of the Republican women in the United States Senate voted for the version of the bill that would ultimately pass with these expanded protections. And when we're talking about gender in politics and the way that the gender divide is played out in partisan terms, I wonder what you make of that.
Well, you know, it's really interesting. I really believe what Senator Stabenow is true, that people believe violence is violence. Gwen Moore, I believe, earlier said, and women are women. And I think that is something that everybody in this country believes, that your basic protections under the law, regardless of what we're talking about, should not be determined on what kind of woman you are. Women are 52% of our country's makeup, and women are women are women. So when rights and protections are afforded to women, they need to be afforded to all women. And, you know, we're seeing more and more women vote that way, and more women, regardless of which side of the aisle they're on, stand up for that basic principle. And I'm thrilled to see it.
Senator Debbie Stabenow.
You know, I also wanted to just say, and if we elect more women, we'll get better results.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really, that is the key question here going forward. And I pine for the day that we have a 50-50 United States Senate. I think it would be a very different place. Senator Debbie Stabenow and Ilyse Hogue, thank you both for your time tonight.
Happy birthday, Chris.
Thank you very much. Coming up, we'll try to make sense of the Republicans' nonsensical legislative strategy. What is